Hello and welcome everybody. This is Ellie Stutz. I'm Knowledge Manager for PNMsoft, and welcome to today's webinar, Meet the Experts, 7 Ingredients of BPM Project Success. Now today's webinar is different from all the other webinars we've had until now. The format is slightly different. It's going to be a little more like a talk show, almost like a radio show where I'm your host, and we have special guests who are our BPM experts here at PNMsoft. So that's me, your host. We're going to be having James Luxford on as our first expert. He's the Global Head of Products at PNMsoft. We'll have Adrian Cole, Product Specialist at PNMsoft, as our second special guest. And we'll have Nick Donkor, BPM Consultant at PNMsoft, as our third expert. And the format of this webinar is I'll be interviewing our experts. They'll be delivering their tips on BPM project success. We'll have 7 tips in all. And then after each expert speaks and I ask them some questions, we're going to open up the floor for you, the attendees of this webinar, to come on the line and ask your questions to our experts live. That means you can write in your questions in your GoToWebinar panel, and Shlomo Steinmetz, who is teching the webinar, will write to you back that you're going to come on the air and ask your question live. And I very much encourage you to do so. And in fact, we actually have 2 prizes for the first 2 askers who will come on and ask their questions live to our BPM experts. The prizes are up to 30 minutes of a phone consultation with our BPM expert, or with any one of them. And that's why I highly encourage you to already now start writing in your questions, and as soon as we take a break for questions, you'll have a chance to win one of those 2 prizes. So the goals of this webinar are as follows. First of all, to focus on the key ingredients necessary to make a BPM project successful. And secondly, to answer your questions about BPM practices. Let's welcome our first guest, James Luxford. James is PNMsoft's Global Head of Products. He's responsible for working with customers, business and technology partners, and the industry to provide global direction for PNMsoft's Business Process Management product suite, which is Sequence. James, are you with us?
I'm here. Hello, everyone.
Welcome, James.
Hi, Ellie.
Hi there. We have a little more on James there in this slide, which you can read. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And why don't we get started right away? James,
Okay.
What is your first tip on BPM project success?
Okay. The first item here that I'd like to talk about, first tip, is about identifying the stakeholders. Now, in any BPM project, and it probably relates to any IT projects generally, but specifically for BPM, and I'll discuss some of the reasons in a moment, but it's key to understand who these stakeholders are. By that, we really mean who owns the process, who's the process owner. For any given process you're going to look to automate, who in the business is responsible, not who uses it on a day-to-day basis, not who's going to get the most value out of it, but who is that key person in the organization that can say, that's how I want the process to be automated. I'm going to sign off the money to spend to automate that process. I shall sign the project off as a success once it's been successfully automated. So very key to identify that process owner. And that may extend to a group of people. It may extend to the executives. More on that a little later.
Okay.
Sorry, just one last thing. Another key aspect is the BPM champion as well, and we can discuss a little more about what is a BPM champion and who that role can be filled by. Okay.
Very good. Okay, so that's an excellent tip. Some questions. What type of person, as far as skill sets, professional position, could be that BPM champion that you're speaking about?
Okay. It really depends on the nature of, first of all, the project, also the organisation as well. But some key skills that we've seen in some of our customers, and our BPM projects where sequence has been implemented, the ones that are really successful are the ones that have a really strong BPM champion. And that's someone that understands the business. They know exactly what the business drivers are, how the business operates, what the potential blockers are to automating processes. They understand who the stakeholders are. They have influence on those stakeholders, and that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be senior to them, but they can influence those stakeholders. They can extol the virtues of automating processes. But it also helps if they have a knowledge of being able to automate business processes, so an awareness of what the logic behind automating a process. And also, probably less important but can help, having an element of technical knowledge, not necessarily down to bits and bytes of how IT systems work, but just having an understanding of the sorts of things you need to consider. Architecture, the fact it's important to have servers that are well spec'd, and all those elements. So IT knowledge.
Yeah, I was going to jump. I was just going to jump in here and ask you: are we talking about a person who's more on the technical side, or a person who's more a business analyst or a business person?
I would say a business analyst. Yes, someone that's on the business side, because it's their understanding of the business, how the business operates, and what parameters the business needs to operate within. That is really key. The IT piece, although IT are very important in BPM projects, the IT are really supporting the business in implementing BPM. So primarily, I would say a business analyst.
Okay.
And that's is supported by what we have seen with our customers. We have a large SI who they put a business analyst in as their sequence champion, and she really drove forward the use of sequence within the organisation, probably far better than I believe someone from IT could have.
Mm-hmm. I understand. What other players should be part of a successful BPM project team besides the champion?
Mm-hmm. Okay, you obviously need the process owner, and when we say project team, it doesn't necessarily just have to be the day-to-day people that will be involved in it. So you need those stakeholders, the executive sponsor, the process owner. They need to be involved, but probably on the periphery and from a reviewing point of view.
Okay.
Within the core project team, you need probably, obviously the BPM champion. Again, if the organisation is undertaking a number of projects, that BPM champion may be splitting that time between those various BPM projects. So you may well need someone to take over, for instance, the business analyst role on a day-to-day basis. You need representation from IT, because that's key. It's key to have IT sponsorship, both from understanding any issues that IT may have, and also so that IT can make sure that the tasks that need to support the BPM project within IT, such as installing servers, connectivity to other systems, happens.
Okay.
So they're the two core people.
Very good. All right. Excellent first tip. Let's move straight on to the next one. Fire away.
Okay. So this is about tactical versus strategic. The majority of BPM projects that we're seeing in today's economy, we believe long gone are large enterprise deployments of BPM. We're seeing a lot more tactical deployments. But those tactical deployments, because once they're implemented, the organisation is seeing the value and the benefits from BPM, they're looking to put more tactical solutions in, and more and more. And we see some customers put lots of tactical solutions in. Where that approach really is successful is where there is a strategic awareness on top of all these tactical projects. And by that we mean just having, and it doesn't need to be in a lot of detail, but just having an awareness of where you want BPM within your organisation to go, seeing where it is in 1 year, in 3 years. It may well be that you're just going to implement it in one tactical project and that's all it'll ever be. But it does really benefit BPM projects if you can have a longer term view.
Now, can you give an example of a couple realistic strategic goals, long-term goals, James?
Okay, there's a little overlap here with my third tip, but I won't steal my thunder there. But two goals that we really see as important is make sure that you've got a centre of excellence in place. And the goal for that centre of excellence is that they continually review all of the BPM projects that have been implemented. This will all become clearer in my next tip, but it's essential in any BPM project that you don't just forget about it, that you review it regularly, make sure it's still delivering that business benefit. So have
a center of excellence is a team of people?
Yes, yes.
I see.
And again, that's about, and this is probably something that you would want to put in if you were thinking strategically about BPM rather than a single BPM project. But again, another reason why you can get success out of BPM is if you're starting to pull together all of those BPM projects and having a central team that are coordinating all of them. Reusability is one of the real key success factors within BPM projects. Mm-hmm. And in order for that to happen, you need to have someone or a team of people who understand what else has been done with the organization. The Centre of Excellence may just be the BPM champion that we mentioned earlier, but as the use of BPM within the organization grows, that will develop from a single person into a group, a Centre of Excellence.
Do you think there is such a thing as getting too far ahead of yourself, planning too far ahead for a BPM project? I mean, things can change, and maybe it's impossible to really predict the future.
I don't think you can plan too far ahead, as long as, of course, you make sure that you regularly review it as you're having your journey towards that end goal. Because, as you say, the economic climate changes, the business drivers change, BPM technology changes. So no, I don't think you can plan too far ahead, but just make sure that you're continually reviewing that plan.
Okay. Somewhere are we okay on the poll thing here? There we go. Perfect. Okay. Well, that was a great second tip, James. Thank you. Just want to shout out to people who are just joining us now. Welcoming you to our webinar, 7 Ingredients of BPM Project Success, and we're meeting the experts, our experts here at PNMsoft. We're talking right now with James Luxford, who's the global head of products. I'm Ellie Stutz, knowledge manager for PNMsoft, and very soon we'll be taking your questions live on this webinar. So please write them in the GoToWebinar dashboard, and very soon we'll be taking a break for questions, and then you'll be able to come on and ask your questions. We have 2 prizes of 30-minute consultations with our expert for the first 2 brave attendees who will be asking the first 2 questions. Let's go to your final tip, James.
Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, this is sort of does overlap slightly with the second tip. What's key with a BPM project? Unlike a lot of IT projects where you have a defined end goal, you want to implement a system, once the system's in there, you can leave it. BPM's subtly different. What's key is that, and if you can just bring up the next graphic, what's key with BPM is that you don't just forget about the project once you've implemented it. Here, the graphic you can see is the traditional, the BPM 5-step cycle where you model your process, implement, execute, monitor, and optimize. But what's key, once you've done that first cycle, don't just forget about it. Make sure you continually go around that cycle, whether that is on a 3-month cycle for a project, for a process that's very highly utilized, or perhaps once a year for less utilized projects. Make sure you're always validating the process. It's making sure it's still delivering the business benefit, that there aren't any bottlenecks in the process, there aren't any redundant steps, or perhaps some ways that you could do the process more effectively, more efficiently.
Now, James, people talk about the optimization stage of the five-part cycle that we're looking at on the screen, but isn't optimization simply repeating the whole cycle again, all of its stages, a second and a third time?
So the optimization step within this cycle is about understanding from the monitoring step, how your process is performing, both from a process point of view, but also a business point of view, and looking at that business intelligence, that management information, and identifying where you could possibly improve your process. And once you've identified how you can optimize it, then you can make those changes in the model step, in the second loop around the cycle. And then later on, the optimization step again will look at the improvements that you've made, make sure they're still effective. There may be additional improvements that you can make. So no, it's not just additional cycles around it. It's each loop around the cycle. You have to look at your process, how effective it is, and make sure you optimize out any issues that there are within the process.
James, are there any elements that are outside the cycle which could be used to improve the cycle itself?
I think it's always key. What you mustn't do with any BPM project, any BPM implementation, is just stay within your little bubble. You need to look at what is available within the organization. So it could well be that the business has changed since we automated the process. There may be new teams come on board. There may be new skills, new expertise. There may be new IT systems that will allow us to to make use of those that will help us to improve our process. So it's always important to have an awareness of what else is available, whether that's people, technology, knowledge, whatever it may be. So yes. With BPM, it's not, you're not, as I said earlier, it's not about being in a little bubble. It's about making use of the assets that are available within the organization so the best effectiveness.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so one second. So we're going to open up the field now for questions for James Luxford, Global Head of Products here at PNMsoft. Shlomo, do we have any questions? 2 questions. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can't.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Okay. Alan from the UK had 2 questions for James. First one, what does the Center of Excellence, what is it meant to do or achieve? My own personal twist on that being, how would you define its success, the parameters for success for such a Center of Excellence? And the second question, how does the BPM lifecycle that you described in the third tip meet business goals?
Okay, so let's just start with the Center of Excellence. I don't want to define prescriptively what a Center of Excellence is. What we mean by that is just having a core focus to BPM within the organization. So that could be one person who just has an awareness of what BPM is, are involved in all of the BPM projects that help the business to transition from a non-automated to an automated organization. How large that needs to get really depends on how widely adopted, how mature the organization is. So it's hard really to say, but what's just key is it's about having a degree of coordination within the organization that any BPM initiatives pass through, just so that you're not getting isolated BPM projects that may clash with each other and that may not give the maximum effectiveness from the deploying of the technology. Does that make sense?
Okay, and how about regarding the second question, how does the cycle achieve the business goals?
Okay, what's important here is it's not so much how the life cycle achieves business goals. BPM isn't at the heart of an organization. BPM is part of the organization, and it's those business goals are always key. So it's always key to make sure that BPM is delivering business benefits. But the key here is the cyclical nature. It means that you are always delivering with BPM what the business needs. If at any point during any stage of that cycle you notice that you're starting to get away from delivering those business benefits, it's at that point that you can then reflect on, well, how can we bring this back on track so that the business may be offering a different product, may be doing things differently, may have different customers. Let's quickly change the process to bring it back on track so that BPM is delivering those true business benefits that we need. If at any point we start getting away from delivering business benefits, you're doomed to failure. And that's why products such as Sequence that are really agile and allow you to change the process very quickly are key. If you're automating a process by writing lines of code, you will never be able to react quick enough to make sure that your BPM project is delivering business benefit throughout the full life cycle.
Excellent. Shlomo, do we have any other questions for James? Okay, James, thank you very much for being with us on this webinar.
Thank you.
And we will continue with our next guest. Before I do that, I just want to encourage everyone who's attending this webinar to ask your questions. Write them in to us here using the GoToWebinar dashboard in the questions tab. There's a little plus sign beside it, and you can ask your questions there. And the first two people who are actually going to come on and ask their questions live will receive a prize of a 30-minute consultation with a PNMsoft BPM expert. So I highly encourage you to write in your questions now and be one of those first two people. Let's continue with our next guest. Adrian Cole is a product specialist for PNMsoft. Adrian provides pre- and post-sales consultancy on PNMsoft's Sequence, that's our enterprise business process management suite, including product demonstrations, envisioning workshops, high-level requirements gathering, and product management. Welcome to our webinar, Adrian.
Hi, Eddie. Hi, everybody.
Okay, we have a little more information on Adrian there. Adrian, let's go straight to your first tip for BPM project success.
Sure. Well, my first tip that I want to talk to you about today is really setting the right scope for that initial project. So my view is that you should really start off small so that you can rapidly show return on investment, so that you can demonstrate the capabilities of the BPMN product, and that will drive the right behaviors within the organization and the expectations of what you can achieve with your BPM solution. It's really around the old adage of not trying to boil the ocean in one step. I think the first BPM project within an organization represents a challenge both technically and culturally. I mean, it's a new BPMS toolset requires the users, be it the business analysts, technical developers or end business users who are going to configure processes themselves to become familiar with the tool, its user interface and its capabilities. But BPM's more than just a technological innovation. It's a shift from traditional development methodologies like a waterfall development to a more agile and iterative process improvement, where end user buy-in is key within the development process. So rather than necessarily speccing out a full project and then IT going away, delivering at the end of that something that the end customer wasn't entirely expecting, it's to involve that the stakeholders that James mentioned, the end users as well, being involved in the design and actually involved in workshops where certainly within Sequence we would configure the process with customer input at all steps within the process.
Okay. Go ahead. Okay. What maybe one more part of the tip, and then I have a couple questions.
Sure, Ali. All I was going to say was when discussing initial candidate projects with a new sequence customer, I tend to look for opportunities where the process is well understood by the team, but maybe not well defined or documented, so that byproducts of the project can be the process mapping and documenting within sequence itself, as well as a standardization of the common process. So, in summary, we need candidate projects to demonstrate real measurable business benefit and implemented in weeks rather than months in comparison to a traditional development cycle.
Can you give an example of a project which is perfect size, and then maybe a second example of a project which is too large for a first project?
Sure. I mean, certainly in terms of, keeping it small and keeping the scope well defined. I mean, we find that really good candidates are those processes which are, let's say, within central functions. HR processes, timesheets, things like that, or those processes are within single lines of business. So you can get a very well-defined project team together. You're not canvassing too many parts of the business in terms of getting the process automated, and you can identify early on, who those stakeholders are to make those decisions, who are empowered to make those decisions.
How do you? Okay, so go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
No, after you.
No, I was just wondering, how do you convince the stakeholders that there is going to be significant return on investment on a small project?
I think really, a smaller project, when we go in with a product like Sequence and it's new to an organization, and going back to my one of my first comments, it's not just the technology. Everybody's seen new waves of information technology, new buzzwords and things like that. But with BPMS, you have the ability to start with a fairly small project. You're not trying to implement a complete enterprise architecture, and therefore, you can have some relatively small investment in time and materials. I mean, as I say, sort of weeks rather than months in terms of development. So the risk associated with such a project is much smaller in comparison to doing an enterprise-wide initiative. So that allows you, through your first project, to demonstrate the capabilities of the product, demonstrate the capabilities of the partner or the vendor that you're working with, and that gives you a real good case study moving forward to then start opening up larger projects for BPMS.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Let's move on to your second tip, Adrian.
Okay, the second tip I had was always to bear in mind your reporting requirements. Let's just say design with reporting in mind, and think what gauges, what management information the business users are going to need to manage their workflows once they're implemented, and make sure that reporting data is captured during the process. Now, that's not to say you let the reporting drive the requirements and design. It's one of the many factors, but it's, in my experience, one that's often overlooked. And you need to be mindful as you're designing the process that you're capturing both the process metadata, so who interacted with the process, when did it happen, and so on, which of course Sequence does as standard, but also the process data itself. So an example might be, I don't know, how many quality incidents affecting our blue widget product occurred in January. Being able to report back out on that data after the event needs to be mapped into the process. So getting the business users who currently work the process in a non-automated fashion, what reports do they do? Commonly in Excel after the event. And how can we incorporate those to drive additional value in terms of the automation?
Now, without getting too detailed or too technical, what sort of practical steps can be taken to ensure that reporting requirements are met?
Well, the reports need to be spec'd out and developed in line with the process design and development. So, I mean, commonly we look at, what reports are currently in place, which reports have the business requested but can't be met at the moment. And in non-automated environments, I mean, we often go into a scenario where the business has need for a raft of reports, but because reports are being created as a manual process after the event by looking through logs, looking through spreadsheets and so on, often the business has a view of what would really help them drive business efficiency, but they can't get at the data. Or if they can get at the data, it takes them a long time, and it's not real time when they get it. So really sitting down with the business users up front as part of the process design workshops and ascertaining what gauges, what dashboards based on real runtime data are going to allow them to drive that business efficiency, and in a way feed back into one of James's tips in terms of optimizing that process as well, and making sure that you're capturing the data and driving the business efficiencies.
Now, can you give a specific example of how you could use a specific report to optimize a BPM process?
Yeah, I mean, within Sequence, we have a number of tools around, statistics to capture data as it flows through the BPM engine. A specific example I'll give you is that we have a number of customers who are using dashboards to reallocate staff between teams or between work stacks dependent on business need and inbound data volumes. So they can redeploy people just at a moment's notice just by looking at, say a pie chart and an expected completion time graph, and they can work out whether or not to take people off of a back office function and put them onto a front office function to achieve their daily SLAs.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for your tips, Adrian. We've been talking with Adrian Cole, BPM project consultant, and we actually have 2 questions for you. Shlomo, do we have anyone who's willing to come on the line with their question?
Sadly not. Adrian, if it's okay with you, I'd like to take the questions because I already conferred with the people that asked. First one was, how do you demonstrate the ROI when you invest in a BPM solution? You're talking about 2 separate stages. First, with no BPM, between no BPM and your first generation, and then between each generation and the one after, how you compare, before and the after. We have a cool case study that I just read. It's a great example of procurement. So when the customer went about implementing their BPM, they asked the key metrics that they had to measure manually at first. How much time is spent end to end on an average request, purchase request. How many repetitions do they have for corrections for wrong or missing information? And they used old-fashioned manual surveys and tests to do that. And then they compared it to what it was like after the first generation implementation of the Sequence, and that's how you measure. Sequence costs you 2x. It costs you so hours, so money per work hour. You know how much time you save over however many requests or whatever the workflow does, and the ROI is pretty straightforward to calculate from that. The second question. Popular problems, technical and non-technical. Adrian, I think this would be better for you to address. How would you describe 2 or 3 most popular problems?
Okay, thanks, Shlomo. And yeah, just to go back to the first question, I mean, I'd agree. I think the ROI model is normally, the bigger challenge is actually pre-automation, but commonly we look at time and motion studies, end-to-end times and things like that to get some metrics out, as Shlomo described. In terms of the problems, then yeah, of course the ROI is one of the common problems. I mean, being able to illustrate to a business the return on investment when maybe some of these metrics don't already exist is certainly one of the challenges. But that's something, Shlomo described. We have experience in digging into the detail, in tracking, the time people interact with the process, maybe the number of lost customers because of the time that the process takes and so on, and getting those metrics into an ROI model. I think if I try and mitigate some of the common problems by keeping that initial project small, because a lot of the time, particularly with BPM, it's more around the relationships that you're forging as opposed to the technology is an enabler. And what we need to do within a BPM project is get interactions going between the end users and the process owners and the people who are going to configure Sequence, which may or may not be the same people. I mean, Sequence gives you a very graphical UI to configure the processes, but it's often a very first experience in terms of doing that with the end users. They're used to having some conversations with IT, and then IT go off and design something and come back. So having that interactive ability to sit down with the end users and show them what the process is going to look like, and then start prototyping in an executable environment such as Sequence, I think really helps you mitigate some of those common problems.
Okay, thank you very much, Adrian Cole. Shlomo, any further questions? Okay, thanks, Adrian, for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay, our next special guest is Nick Donkor. He is an application developer and BPM consultant at PNMsoft. Nick holds a degree in mechanical engineering from Imperial College London and has worked as a family room specialist for Apple Retail. Nick, welcome to our webinar.
Hi, Ellie. How are you doing?
Very good. You're coming in loud and clear.
Excellent. Perfect. Hello, everyone.
Before we go to your tips, Nick, I just want to announce again that this webinar is a new format. We're taking your live questions for our BPM experts. It's a live question and answer format. So please write in your questions in the GoToWebinar dashboard in the questions tab. And the first asker who's willing to come on live on audio and ask their question will get our announced prize, which is a 30-minute consultation with a BPM expert here at PNMsoft. First two, I should say. We have one expert left, so all the people who are listening, I highly encourage you to come on and ask your questions, and you can write them in already. Okay, Nick, what is your first tip for BPM project success?
Okay, so my first tip today is involving the business users early on in the project. You may have heard both James and Adrian comment on the business users, stakeholders, etc. And really what I want to touch upon is, and expand upon really, is how important it is to involve the business users in any BPM project. The reason being that really the people that are going to be using the project and reporting back to the higher up stakeholders will be those business users. And any BPM project has its iterations, and the business users are the ones that are going to see the most change and the most impact from that. What I would say
go ahead.
Yeah, what I would say with getting the business users involved is really getting them together and forming those communications that Adrian was talking about, and building those relationships so that we get conversations going, and specifying really what the requirements are for the users. The stakeholders understand a very high level of the process, so how the step to step, what they're looking for from the start of the process to the end of the process, but how the work is actually done on a day-to-day basis, that's really the business users. And by getting them involved early, we as the developers can see how the actual implementation is going to impact their day-to-day work.
Now there could be business users who have trouble with the current process. There could be business users who perform well, whose performance is higher. What type of business user are you going after, especially when it comes to getting input from the business users?
Okay, I mean, what we're looking for when we talk about involving the business users is anyone that's going to have exposure to sequence. So that could be the developers of the process, it could be the actual end users, as in the ones that are running through the runtime of the process. And it's really to get a feel for what their expectations are and how they see that process working from their point of view. So it can be any type of user. It could be the management as well. They're looking for mainly reporting from what's going on with the business users, and also the business analysts who created the process. We want to really just get them all involved, because the requirement for the process, as James was saying, as you go through the cycle, is going to always be evolving, always iterating. And it's really by communication, by getting the relationship between all those stakeholders, the business users, the business analysts, etc., and also the developers, that will be able to get the most from the process.
Is it ever not advisable to listen to a business user? Have you ever come across that kind of example?
Not as yet myself. I've only been with the PNMsoft for a year, but I would say in most of the projects with, getting the business user involved always helps for a more, I suppose getting the business user involved helps us to push forward that collaborative working. Because one of the things that people say with automating a process is that you take away from the conversations, you getting people to actually communicate. And what we want to do is actually enforce that and build it upon it. So creating the process shouldn't really move from that hands-on, yes, I'm working with someone who may be in another office, but I want to get involved. I want to find out, how is the work that I'm doing affecting that user? How can I better improve my process? So in particular, one department might have a particular process that's working with another department, and how, if we can get those two departments talking and communicating, we can really say, well, how does what I do affect that side of the process, and how are they doing affecting me? And then if I can get that information, I can better optimize the process. And again, going back to James's iteration, I can then, as we go through the process life cycle, push that to be better performing, more cost effective, and just really make it into a more optimized process.
At what point would you give the process, let's say in sequence, to the users to test?
Okay, regular feedback is something that we always do recommend. So as soon as you've got anything that's tangible that you can demonstrate, particularly in terms of UI, you want to get the users involved, because it's that area that usually takes the longest time with a process when you're going in with a BPM product. The process definition is usually fairly well known by the business. Okay, they may not have all the requirements down to a T, but they understand the steps. They understand what the process needs to achieve. And then we have to go in and then we have to build that into initially what looks like a static process, step-by-step activities and forms, etc. And over time we then evolve that to match the business. So I'd really say that we take the process into the customer as soon as possible. And then taking their feedback, we would then use that to build the process closer and closer to the requirement. And again, it comes into my next tip in terms of managing the scope creep. As we build that process closer to their requirements, we just need to manage what things are considered changes as opposed to development within the scope of that current project.
Okay, so then in that case, let's jump to your next tip. Go ahead.
Okay, so managing scope creep. As James was saying earlier, a BPM project is iterative, and from the first implementation of a process, it goes through many life cycles in order to get closer and closer to what we'd say the optimized process is. And scope creep is really where the definition of the project changes over a period of time, but there isn't really any management of that change. So the best way to do this really is to predefine that requirement, have it signed off by the stakeholders, and those stakeholders will be able to say when a particular requirement has been met. If there are changes to a particular requirement, you want to capture those, but not necessarily make any alterations to your current roadmap. Reason being that as you start making alterations during the development, you start pushing out the timescales. And as BPM is meant to be a rapid deployment, you want to get a process out there, then they'll come back with iterations, etc. You want to manage those on the next iteration, and not necessarily with the current development.
But even still, aren't there situations where in the middle of a project, the organization simply realizes that it needs to redefine the requirements for whatever reason, for external reasons, or simply because they see that what they expected or what they asked for is not what they need? So does that count? Does that count as scope creep, or is it ever possible to change direction in the middle?
Changing direction always incurs more cost the later on it's done in the project. So that's why we'd say involve the users early. We want to catch any changes in the requirements as soon as possible, so that if we do need to change direction, it's done at the earliest stage in the project and not when things are getting to the point where we're trying to implement them on site, for instance. Backtracking, it takes time, and it also costs money. So as early on as possible, and as I said, I'm not saying we can't change the direction, but we want to do that as early as possible within the actual project lifecycle.
Now, how do you demonstrate that a process has met the requirements?
Okay, so one of the things that we recommend is that everything is documented early on. So, for instance, as James was saying with the stakeholders, and as Adrian was saying with getting the communication between the stakeholders and the business users, we want everyone to agree, and of course it's sometimes very difficult working with large organizations to get a universal agreement, but in the end, as James was saying, the stakeholder would make the decision. But we do want, as common practice and best practice for us, to get as happy customer as we can. So we would say that we want to take the process and the how to explain really. We want to take the process and everything that we've put together and designed, and we want to document it into requirements, achievements, goals. All of that needs to be specified so that when it does come to delivering the project, we can say, right, we've got to this stage and we're happy with that deliverable. If at any point they feel that deliverable is going off track, we want to catch that early on. And again, that's where we look at either managing the scope creep or, as I said, changing direction. But we do that early on in the project.
Okay, excellent tip. Okay, so we're talking right now with Nick Donkor, BPM consultant for PNMsoft, and I'm Ellie Stutz, your host for this webinar. Shlomo, do we have any questions for Nick? 1 second.
Yes, we do. I've again, of course, corresponded before. I'd like to field 2 questions from the UK. Essentially, the question one is: how do you plan in the scope of all the planning for the changes in planning for a clear spec? How do you plan for the mobile user? How do you include that into your first planning stages? So the first thing is the general principles of it. I can again bring an example from a large utilities customer in North America. They have the nature of their users are mobile users out in the field, laptops based on 3rd generation internet, and that entails a few preparation that you need to make at the design stage. You have to know that when your users are using old and battered and many times slow internet connections, you've got to prepare for that. When your workflow is meant to be accessed from out in the field, then you want to simplify the entry points to the bare minimum that's required from the people from working out in the field. Similarly, you have typically will be managers flying around the world requiring with questions that require their attention. You have to plan your workflow so that you can collect all the information that you need and present it as a concise email with a list of facts, a list of questions, and whatever, and then you can make use of the sequence's one-click action, the option to for any user, and typically for a manager, with a click on the link within the email to approve or decline or progress the workflow however you choose. A separate integration is also location-based. Again, when we're talking about mobile users, many times and for various different reasons, you would use location-based BPM. The particular example that I'm referring to is an integration with a map providing service, which integrates with sequence, receives GPS coordinates, and renders on the return form to the user a satellite image of the area for the work that needs to be done. All of this needs to be addressed as early on as possible, because these are big chunks of your project. Integrations require the hardware preparations, the financial preparations. Some of them are, of course, paid for. You need to check the nature of your business, what you're going to be passing along, how you're going to prepare for information security, so that when you're sending information out through emails and through mobile devices, how you make sure that you're not putting information out there that you don't want to potentially be seen by others. Is there a question, Slomo? And that pretty much I put an end to that sentence. All these questions, these are the questions that you have to ask yourself when you're planning. One last thing, and I'll give this back to Nick because I'm sure you're quite experienced with it. What happens when the client keeps changing the scope?
Okay, yes, it is something that happens now and again, where the scope is not nailed down at the start, and that does allow for the client to make those sort of changes. So really the way to get around that is at the very start is to make these requirements defined. And once they're defined, you're always working to a fixed structure. And of course that's only for the first iteration. You want to define it for the first iteration so that you can get to this rapid deployment. Once it's deployed, then you're into managing change, and then you're looking at implementing a better, not more optimized process, in which case that's where a lot of those scope changes can be brought in. So getting that documentation early, defining those requirements, and then working to get that rapid deployment before bringing in a lot of those changes is the best way.
Okay, any further questions, Slomo? Okay, thank you very much, Nick Donkor, BPM consultant for PNMsoft. Okay, let's summarize. Our 7 ingredients for BPM project success from this webinar, meeting the experts at PNMsoft. First of all, identifying stakeholders. Secondly, formulate a long-term strategy. Third, keep in mind the BPM cycle for continual improvement. Fourth, start small. Fifth, keep reporting in mind. Sixth, involve business users early. And 7, know how to manage scope creep. So that wraps up this webinar. This was a new format. The Q&A, the special guests, meeting the experts. Please let us know if you appreciated this format, if you'd like us to repeat the format in the future. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can email me, les@pnmsoft.com. And of course, the webinar will be available on our website and on our Knowledge Center. Our website is www.pnmsoft.com. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shlomo Steinmetz, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, James, Adrian, and Nick. All the best. Ellie Stutz here signing off.